Dark red stains spread through the light fabric of her torn dress long before Emily even realized the blood was hers. She didn't feel the sun on her back or the grit scraping into her knees. What she did feel was fear, sharp, wild, the kind that locked itself under her ribs and refused to let go. Barely an hour earlier, her father had shoved her out the front door, his voice slurred, his breath thick with whiskey. He kept yelling that she was the only thing left he could trade, that if she didn't marry Caleb Price today, he would lose the house, the land, everything he'd ever owned. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Emily had begged him, cried for him to stop. Instead, he struck her so hard the crack echoed across the empty yard. That was the moment she ran, barefoot, half-dressed, shaking so badly she almost tripped over her own shadow. She grabbed the small kitchen knife on instinct, the last thing her hand touched as she bolted through the doorway. The open field swallowed her. Her lungs burned. Her tears blurred everything. She didn't know how long she'd been running when her right foot landed crooked, trying to jump a narrow ditch. A sharp, snapping pain shot up her leg. Her ankle buckled, sending her collapsing into the dirt. Her scream vanished into the wind. Still, she crawled. Still, she pushed her trembling body forward because somewhere behind her, men were shouting, Caleb's men, and Emily knew exactly what they would do if they found her. Up ahead stood an old wooden fence, leaning but still standing. To her, it looked like a line between danger and a chance at something else. She forced herself upright, grabbed the top rail, and pulled. Her fingers slipped. A rusted nail caught her dress and sliced across her waist, ripping cloth and skin in one cruel swipe. Hot blood slid down her side. She fell over the fence and hit the ground hard. The world swayed. Tall yellow grass tilted into the blue sky. She whispered for help, but her voice barely left her throat. A small ranch sat just ahead, a quiet yard, an open gate, a worn barn slouched like an old man ready to lie down. If she could reach it, maybe someone would help her before Caleb's men caught up. Emily dragged herself through the dust. Every movement pulled fire through her ankle. Her dress clung to her like wet paper. Blood trailed behind her, streaking the dirt. By the time she reached the gate, her arms gave out. Her cheek hit the warm ground. Her vision dimmed at the edges. Footsteps approached, slow, heavy, deliberate. A tall man stood over her, broad shoulders blocking the sun, hat tipped low so she couldn't see his eyes. With the last breath she owned, she whispered, "Please." He crouched beside her. Strong hands, steady hands, lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Hands nothing like the ones that had hurt her. Hands that made her chest loosen for the first time that day. When Emily woke again, she felt what beneath her back, a sun-warmed table, and the scent of hay and dust around her. A man stood over her, built thick through the shoulders, face rugged from years in the Kansas sun. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ankle and dragged her down. "Don't move," he said quietly, placing his hand near her shoulder. His voice was gentle, calm, like he'd seen enough storms to know how to ride them out. She stared up at him, breath unsteady, unsure whether to trust him or fear him. "Let me look at your foot," he said. Her face warmed with embarrassment, but she nodded. He lifted the hem of her dress just enough to see the swollen ankle. His fingers were careful, steady. Twisted, not broken, he murmured. But when his hand moved toward the torn fabric at her waist, toward the wound, panic seized her again. She grabbed the small knife hidden in her dress and thrust it toward him with shaking hands. He caught her wrist before the blade touched him, firm but not cruel. "If I meant you harm," he said softly, "you wouldn't be lying on my table." His voice didn't scare her. It steadied her. Something old lived behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something she couldn't name. Slowly, Emily lowered the knife. And for the first time since she'd run from home, she felt like she might not be completely alone. Emily lay still, her breath catching as the man, Jack, cleaned the blood at her waist. His movements were steady, not rushed, not unsure. For a moment, she wondered how someone could be so calm with a stranger bleeding across his work table. The cool cloth stung when it touched her wound, and she flinched, but Jack didn't pull away. His jaw tightened only slightly, like he was used to pain, his or someone else's. When he finished pressing the cloth against her side, he eased himself into the chair next to the table. The scraping would made her tense up, but his voice came out gentle, almost quiet. "You got someone after you?" The question sat heavy in the air. Emily's fingers curled against the edge of the table. She didn't want to say the words out loud again, but hiding them hadn't saved her before, and she doubted silence would save her now. "My father owes money," she whispered. "He said Caleb Price could fix everything if I married him. I said no. He didn't like that." Her voice cracked. "So he tried to force me." Jack listened without interrupting. Not one word, not one sharp breath, just that tightness along his jaw, the only sign he'd heard enough to make any decent person angry. When she finished, he leaned back slightly and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. "Caleb Price doesn't let go of things he thinks belong to him," he said. His tone was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it, something that made Emily's stomach twist. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of hooves drifted in from the yard, slow, not rushed, like someone who didn't think they needed permission to arrive. Jack rose from his chair, his boots whispering across the dusty floor. A moment later, an older man stepped into the sunlight, hat tipped back, coat dusted from travel. "Hank." Jack greeted him with a brief nod. "Didn't expect to see you playing doctor," Hank joked lightly, but his smile vanished when he noticed Emily lying on the table. His eyes swept over her torn dress, the dried blood on her skin, the fear barely held together in her expression. "Oh," he muttered, rubbing the gray in his beard. "So the rumors are true. Caleb's got men all over town looking for a girl in a ripped dress. The kind of men who brag about things they shouldn't." Emily stiffened. Jack didn't look at her. His gaze stayed locked on Hank. "Price ride out himself?" Jack asked. "Not yet," Hank said, "but he's in a temper. And if he finds her here, he'll bring trouble to anyone standing between them." His voice lowered a shade. "You sure you want this on your land, Jack? A man with your history usually avoids attention." Emily's heartbeat thudded painfully. "History?" The word hung in the room like smoke. She looked between the two men, waiting for someone to explain, but both fell silent. Jack stared at the ground, the muscles in his shoulders tight enough to strain his shirt. Whatever Hank meant wasn't a small thing. She wanted to ask him, needed to ask him, but the set of his jaw told her it wouldn't be answered today. Hank eventually tipped his hat and rode off, leaving the yard quiet again. Emily rested her head back against the table, trying to breathe through the ache in her waist. Jack pulled the chair closer and sat down, but he didn't look at her right away. His eyes scanned the empty horizon like he expected something to appear any second. Emily swallowed. "What did Hank mean?" she whispered carefully. Jack didn't answer, not with words, just a slow breath, a tightening of his hands, and a look in his eyes that said the truth wasn't something he liked remembering. Before she could push further, something in the air shifted, the soft tremble of ground moving under weight. Hoofbeats. More than one. Jack stood in one smooth motion, the chair scraping behind him. "Stay quiet," he said, his voice colder than before. He picked up his rifle like it belonged in his hand. Emily's pulse jumped. Two riders appeared beyond the fence, rough-looking men with cheap pistols on their hips. They pulled their horses to a stop, glancing around like they owned the place. "We're looking for a girl," one called out. "Long hair, torn dress, might be hurt. You seen her?" Jack didn't blink. "Just cattle and dust out here." His hand rested on the rifle in a way that even a fool would understand. The men exchanged glances. One swung off his horse, boots thudding against the dirt. Emily's heart climbed in her throat. She tried to pull herself lower behind the hay bales stacked by the barn entrance. Her ankle throbbed. Her waist burned. Footsteps echoed inside the barn, slow, deliberate. Boards creaked. A bucket clattered. Then the man took 2 steps toward her hiding place. Before he could take the third, Jack's voice cut through the air. "You lost something?" The man spun around. Jack grabbed his arm and slammed him against a support beam, so hard dust rained from the rafters. Outside, The second rider reached for his gun, too slow. Jack fired, the shot tearing the brim off the man's hat and sending it spinning into the dirt. The rider froze, white as chalk. Emily pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. For the first time, she saw the man she'd trusted her life to was far more dangerous than she had understood. And she couldn't help wondering, not for the last time, what would happen when Caleb Price himself arrived. The two riders galloped away as fast as their horses could carry them, leaving only a cloud of dust trembling in the late afternoon light. Emily stayed hidden behind the hay bales for a few heartbeats longer, her hands shaking so badly she had to press them against her stomach just to keep still. Her breath was uneven, hot in her throat. She had never seen someone move the way Jack did. Calm, controlled, scary in a way that didn't feel reckless, just final. He lowered his rifle slowly, shoulders rising and falling as if shaking off an old instinct he'd hoped never to use again. When his eyes finally found her through the dim barn, they softened just enough that she knew he wasn't proud of what he'd done. He'd only done what he had to. That somehow made her chest pull even tighter. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, though her whole body felt like it was still trembling. I didn't think they'd actually come in here. Men like that don't think twice," Jack said. "They only stop when someone makes them." He didn't say the rest out loud, but she heard it anyway. And today, that someone was me. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dust drifted through the slanted sunlight like slow snowflakes. Emily stared at the spot where the man had nearly found her. Her ankle pulsed with pain, but that wasn't what made her breath shake. It was knowing how close she'd been, how easily it all could have ended, and how one stranger's choice had changed everything. Jack walked toward her and crouched beside her hiding spot. His presence felt grounding, like the world steadied itself a bit when he was near. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you back inside." He helped her up without rushing, slipping one arm around her back and letting her lean into him. Emily didn't mean to, but her fingers curled into his shirt, needing something solid to hold on to. He didn't comment, didn't flinch, just steadied her and guided her across the yard. Back inside the small kitchen area, the quiet felt louder than gunfire. Emily sat on a wooden chair near the window, watching Jack place his rifle on the counter like it was a part of him he didn't like being reminded of. His hand shook slightly when he let go of it. Just slightly, but she saw it. "You could have gotten killed," she whispered. He shrugged once, staring at the floor. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. Something tightened in her chest. Worry, fear, or maybe something else entirely, something she didn't have a right name for yet. Jack wasn't reckless. He wasn't brave in a loud way. He was the kind of man who carried things alone because he'd been doing it too long to stop. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sure. He lifted his eyes to her, and for a moment Emily saw a flicker of something wounded there. Something tired. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You were in trouble." "People see trouble all the time," Emily murmured. "Most walk the other way." Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said enough. A long minute passed. Emily could hear her own heartbeat slowing, settling, beginning to believe she was safe, at least for the moment. But the peace didn't last. A low rumble began to roll across the open land, too steady, too heavy for just one rider. Jack heard first. His back stiffened. He stepped toward the doorway, not reaching for his rifle yet, but close enough to touch it if he needed to. "What is it?" Emily asked, her stomach twisting. He didn't turn around. Trouble coming bigger than the last. Emily's breath skipped. The rumble grew louder. Multiple horses this time. A small group. Moving slow, like they weren't rushing to find someone. Like they already knew where she was. Fear gripped her throat again. She gripped the sides of the chair, her fingers turning white. Is it Caleb?" she whispered. Jack's jaw clenched. "Yeah." A single word, pulled from somewhere deep. Emily's knees felt weak, just hearing his name. Even from a distance, Caleb Price had a way of making the world feel smaller, tighter, like he owned the air you breathed. Jack finally reached for his rifle. Not quickly, not with nerves, but with the resigned steadiness of someone picking up a burden he tried hard to leave buried. "You don't have to do this," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "He's dangerous." Jack glanced at her. "So am I." There was no pride in the words, no threat, just the simple truth of a man who'd lived through things he never wanted to explain. Emily swallowed hard. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Jack looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the weight of everything he wasn't saying. You were scared, he said quietly, and no one helped me when I was. The confession hit her like a breath she hadn't seen coming. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, more real than anything she'd heard in a long time. Before Emily could speak, the hoofbeats slowed outside. The shadows of riders stretched across the yard. Jack stepped forward, steady and unshaken. Emily's heart pounded. Caleb Price had arrived, and the world held its breath. Caleb Price rode into the yard with 3 men behind him, their horses kicking up slow clouds of dust. The kind of entrance meant to show ownership. The kind meant to remind everyone who held the power. Emily felt cold crawl up her spine, even though the heat outside was heavy enough to choke. Jack stepped out of the barn doorway, rifle in hand. Not raised, not pointed, just held in that calm, steady way that said he knew exactly how to use it. Caleb's smile curled sharp when he spotted him. Well, I'll be damned, he drawled. Jack Boone, didn't expect to find you here. Didn't think you were the type to take in strays. Jack didn't move. Turn around, Price. Caleb laughed once, loud and confident. You got something of mine. Bring the girl out. She belongs to me. Emily's stomach twisted. She pressed a shaking hand against her waist, trying to hold herself together. Jack's voice cut clean through the air. A woman isn't something a man owns. Caleb's smile faded at the edges. She is when her daddy gives her as payment. Jack stepped forward another pace. She's under my roof. That's the only truth that matters. One of Caleb's men leaned in close and muttered something into his ear. Caleb's posture shifted. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed, as if trying to match the pieces of a memory. Then he stared harder at Jack. Wait, he whispered. Jack! Boone! A beat of silence fell over the yard. Then his voice cracked in disbelief. Black Hand Boone. Emily saw the color drain from Caleb's face. She didn't know the name, but she felt its weight. Even the men behind him stiffened, hands twitching near their guns. Jack's eyes didn't flicker. That was a long time ago. Caleb swallowed. You're telling me the same man who wiped out the Double Cross gang, the same man railroad bosses used to whisper about, is hiding a runaway girl in his barn? Jack's voice was steady. I'm telling you to leave. Caleb tried to muster a smile, but it came out thin and shaky. Jack, listen. I don't want trouble with you. Just give her back. She's my deal. My money. Jack cut him off, and his voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight that felt like the sky dropping. Say property or belonging, and I will put a bullet in the dirt right under your boots. And then another one higher. Emily's breath hitched. Caleb flinched, actually flinched at the quiet threat. Jack, he said slowly, I'm trying to be reasonable. So am I, Jack answered. She stays. Caleb's jaw clenched. If you take her side, you're choosing war. Jack raised his rifle, not aiming, just lifting it enough for the sun to gleam along the barrel. No, I'm choosing what's right. A long, harsh silence settled. Emily watched Caleb's throat bob as he swallowed again. For the first time, he looked unsure, afraid, but not of losing a fight, of losing to a man who didn't bluff. Caleb jerked his chin at his men. We're leaving, he muttered. Now, one of his riders protested. But boss, now, Caleb barked, voice cracking. They turned their horses around, dust kicking up under hooves. Caleb didn't look back as he rode off. Maybe because he didn't want Jack to see the fear in his eyes, or maybe because he couldn't bear to lose twice in one day. As soon as they disappeared over the rise, Emily felt her breath release in a shaky flood. Her fingers curled over her knees, gripping them tight to steady herself. Jack lowered his rifle and let his shoulders drop as if he'd been holding up the sky. Emily whispered, You could have killed him. Jack turned toward her, his eyes softer now. And what would that make me? The man I used to be? She shook her head, voice trembling. No, it would have made you someone who saved me. His voice dropped. I already did. Emily felt her throat tighten. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who carried scars she couldn't see, scars as heavy as her own. I didn't know you had a past like that, she said softly. Jack let out a tired breath. Didn't want you to. Why not? Because people think a name tells them everything. His voice cracked just barely. But they don't know the man who crawled out of it. Emily swallowed, her chest aching. Then tell me who you are now. Jack looked at her for a long moment. The wind tugged at the dust. The yard settled into a quiet that almost felt peaceful. I'm someone who saw a girl bleeding at his gate, he said, voice low and sincere, and couldn't walk away. Her eyes stung, and she blinked fast, feeling something warm and painful in her chest. Jack, she whispered, not sure what she meant to say, but he shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything. Not thanks. Not trust. Just rest. That's enough for now. Emily nodded, and for the first time since she'd been shoved out of her own home, she believed she was safe for a moment longer. Maybe safe for the night. Maybe safe as long as Jack Boone stood between her and the world. The yard stayed quiet long after Caleb and his men vanished into the heat haze. Emily sat near the open barn door, her hands resting in her lap, fingers still trembling from everything that had happened. Jack stood a few feet away, staring down the dirt road, like he wasn't looking at distance at all, like he was looking at memories he didn't want. She watched the way his shoulders stayed stiff, how his jaw clenched ever so slightly. He wasn't fearless. He was bracing. For what? She didn't know. Finally, she whispered, Are they coming back? Jack didn't turn. Men like Caleb don't like losing, and he lost twice today. Emily swallowed. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. He exhaled a sharp breath, the kind that carried years of things unsaid. I didn't get dragged. I stepped in. But why? She asked, voice cracking. You don't even know me. He turned then, eyes dark and direct. Because no one helped me when I needed it. And I'll be damned if I leave someone else to the wolves. Emily felt her chest pull tight. It wasn't the words, though they hit hard. It was the truth behind them. She could hear the history in his tone, the weight of it, the pieces of a man who'd learned how cruel the world could be. Jack, she whispered, what happened to you? He didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. For once, he didn't look like the man who'd scared hired guns speechless. He looked human, tired, maybe a little lost. When I was younger, he said slowly, I did things for men who liked blood more than peace. Men who paid well and slept fine at night while the rest of us carried the guilt. His eyes lifted to hers. Sometimes I thought I didn't deserve a place like this. A quiet life. A second chance. Emily leaned forward. Everyone deserves a second chance. A faint, sad smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not everyone gets one. She swallowed hard. But you did, and you used it to help me. That has to mean something. Before Jack could respond, the sound of another horse approached, slow, not threatening. Hank. His old friend rode into the yard, slid off his saddle, and walked toward them with a heavy sigh. Well, Hank muttered, looking between them, Caleb stomping back into town like a man who sat on a cactus. Words already spreading, he backed down from Jack Boone. Emily glanced nervously at Hank. Is that bad? Hank shrugged. For Caleb? Yeah. For you too? Depends on how stupid he feels when the sun goes down. Jack's shoulders tightened again. If he comes back, I'll handle it. Hank raised an eyebrow. By yourself. I've done worse, Jack said flatly. Hank looked at Emily, then at Jack. You're not alone here, you stubborn fool. If trouble comes, you shout. Jack's voice softened, more than Emily expected. I know. Thank you. Hank nodded once, then turned to Emily, his tone gentle. You're safe here. Maybe safer than anywhere else in Kansas, now that you've got this one watching your shadow. Emily's cheeks warmed. Jack didn't react, but she saw the faint flicker in his eyes, something between surprise and discomfort, like feelings weren't territory he liked walking in. Hank rode off again, leaving them alone in the growing evening light. Emily looked down at her hands, then back at Jack. She hesitated, then spoke softly. You don't have to protect me, you know. Jack blinked. I don't. No, she whispered. But you're choosing to. Jack stared at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing through the quiet between them. Then he exhaled. I choose what's right. And what's human. His voice lowered. Not what's easy. Emily's breath hitched. He wasn't distant anymore. He wasn't guarded. He was speaking to her pain, her fear, her vulnerability, in a way that reached deeper than she expected. Jack, I'm scared, she confessed, her voice trembling. I know, he said softly, but fear doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're still fighting. He leaned closer, his eyes locked with hers. And as long as I'm here, you're not fighting alone. Emily swallowed hard. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to break. Jack didn't look away. His gaze held hers, steady and warm, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. You're safe tonight, he said. I promise. Emily believed him. She didn't know why. She didn't know how. But she believed him. And for the first time since her world fell apart, she felt like she wasn't running anymore. She was standing beside someone willing to stand with her. The sun sank low, casting long shadows across the yard as evening settled in. Emily sat by the window of the small kitchen, watching the sky fade into softer colors. Everything felt quieter now, too quiet, like the world was catching its breath after holding it all day. Jack moved around the room, lighting a lamp, checking the doors, glancing outside every few minutes. He didn't pace, didn't panic, but Emily could see the tension in him, coiled tight, waiting. Finally, she asked, Do you think he'll come back tonight? Jack didn't look at her when he answered. If Caleb talks himself brave enough, yeah. Men like him don't sleep well when they're embarrassed. Emily's fingers twisted together. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. Jack stopped what he was doing. He turned toward her slowly, his voice firm. Emily, listen carefully. She lifted her eyes. What happened to you wasn't your fault, he said. And what Caleb wants isn't love. It's control. You're not asking for trouble. You're trying to survive. She blinked hard, her throat tightening. But if someone gets shot, then it's because Caleb made a choice, Jack interrupted gently. Not because you breathed. Those words hit her deeper than she expected. She swallowed. You talk like you've been on both sides of that. Jack sat down across from her, leaning forward, elbows braced against his knees. For a moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was low. I've stood where Caleb's standing now, he admitted, thinking I could take what I wanted because no one was strong enough to stop me. Emily's breath caught. You're not that man anymore. Jack gave a small, humorless smile. Maybe not, but I remember him. I remember how easy it was to believe the world owed me something. He shook his head slowly. Caleb's made of that same sickness. Men like that don't go home and change. Emily hesitated, then reached out, just a small, hesitant touch to his forearm. You changed. Jack looked down at her hand, surprised. His eyes met hers again, softer this time. Only because life forced me to, and because someone once told me I had worth, even when I didn't believe it. A beat passed. Emily whispered, Then maybe you're doing the same for me. Jack's breath faltered just a little. He didn't pull away. Before he could respond, a distant shout carried through the window. Emily stiffened. Jack's head lifted sharply. Another voice. Closer. Jack stood instantly. Stay here. Don't move. Emily grabbed his sleeve. Jack, don't go out there alone. He placed his hand gently over hers. I have to. You don't, she whispered desperately. You don't owe me this. His voice deepened, quiet but certain. I don't owe you. I care. The simple honesty of it shook her. Her hand slipped from his sleeve as he turned and stepped out into the yard. Emily pushed herself to the window, heart pounding. She could see dark shapes moving near the edge of the property. 3 men. Not Caleb. Not yet. Jack stood in front of them, calm as ever, but Emily could feel the tension between them like a wire stretched too tight. One man spat on the ground. Price wants the girl. We ain't leaving without her. Jack's voice carried clear even from a distance. Then you'll leave disappointed. Another man sneered. Don't test us, Boone. Jack stepped closer, eyes sharp. Boys, I've had guns pointed at me by men way braver than you. Trust me when I say, turn around. You're not dying for Caleb's pride. Emily felt her breath snag. Jack wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was telling them a truth he'd lived. The tallest of the men drew his pistol halfway. "Move, Boone." Jack's voice dropped colder than steel. "If you reach any further, you won't be walking away." Emily pressed her fingers to the glass, shaking. She knew Jack wasn't bluffing. She knew those men could feel it too. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the shortest man cracked. "This ain't worth getting shot over," he muttered. Caleb didn't say nothing about fighting him. The one with the gun hesitated, cursed under his breath, then holstered his weapon. "Fine, but Price will come himself." Jack didn't waver. "Then he'll leave the same way you are." The men finally turned their horses and rode off, muttering curses into the wind. Emily sagged against the window, air rushing out of her lungs. Jack walked slowly back toward the house, not victorious, not proud, just tired. Deeply, bone-worn tired. When he stepped inside, Emily whispered, "They could have killed you." Jack closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. "Emily, I've been close to dying so many times it feels like an old neighbor." He looked at her with something raw in his eyes. "But I would have gone out there 1,000 more times before I let them take you." Emily's voice broke. "Why? Why would you risk that for me?" Jack stepped closer, slow, gentle. "Because no one ever fought for me," he said. "And I'm done letting the world swallow good people." Emily's breath trembled. "You think I'm good?" Jack's jaw tightened, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I think you're worth saving." Her heart cracked open at the words. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't trying to own her. Someone was choosing her. And that changed everything. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, thick and unmoving. Emily sat at the edge of the small bed Jack had set up for her in the corner of the main room. The lamp flickered softly, throwing warm gold across the walls. Every sound outside made her heart twitch. Every breeze, every creak of wood, every distant rustle. Jack sat nearby, cleaning his rifle with slow, methodical movements. Not rushed, not careless, just steady. But Emily could see the truth in the tightness of his jaw and the way his breathing kept catching. He was prepared, bracing, waiting for the storm Caleb would bring. Emily watched him for a moment, his quiet focus, the heaviness in his shoulders. Then she spoke softly. "Jack, you look exhausted." He paused. "I'm fine." "You're not," she pressed gently. "You've been watching that door every second since sunset." He didn't deny it. He just set the rifle down and exhaled through his nose, tired and worn. "He'll come," he said quietly. "Caleb doesn't know how to lose." Emily swallowed. "You don't have to fight for me anymore." Jack looked at her sharply. "I'm not fighting for you," he said. "I'm fighting for what's right." Her voice dropped. Sometimes those two things are the same. Jack stared at her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. Something he didn't know how to say, maybe something he didn't think he deserved to say. Finally, he reached for his hat and set it on the table. "Emily, earlier you asked why I helped you. Why I didn't walk away." He hesitated. "I've been trying to give you an honest answer. I just don't know how to say it without sounding foolish." Her heart picked up. "Try." He took a breath, slow, heavy. "Because the moment I saw you collapse at my gate, something in me woke up. Something I thought died a long time ago." Emily felt warmth rise to her face. "What woke up?" Jack met her eyes, voice low. "The part of me that remembers what it's like to be alone, to have no one stand up for you." He paused. "And the part that never wanted anyone else to feel that way." Emily looked down, her fingers curling around the blanket. "I haven't had anyone stand up for me in years," she whispered. "Not once. Not until you." Jack's voice softened even more. "You deserved better long before you got here." She blinked fast, her breath unsteady. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't," he said firmly. "You don't owe me anything at all." A long, gentle silence stretched between them. Emily looked at him again, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the scruff along his jaw, the tired but steady strength he carried. He wasn't a man trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be good. And that made him feel even more dangerous in a different way. Dangerous to her heart. She whispered, "You're nothing like the man Hank talked about." Jack's expression flickered. "Yes, I am. I'm just trying hard not to be." Emily shook her head. "You're not perfect, but you're kind. You're protective. You care." Her voice trembled. That's who you are now. Jack swallowed, looking away as if the words hurt in a place he kept hidden. I wish I could believe that. Then let me believe it for you, she said gently. He looked back at her, really looked, and for a moment his guard slipped, just enough for her to see the truth behind it. Then suddenly, hoofbeats. Not soft, not distant. Close, heavy, purposeful. Emily froze. Jack stood instantly, grabbing his rifle. Get behind the dresser, he said quietly. Jack! Now, Emily. She moved behind the dresser, crouching low, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Jack stood by the door, rifle raised but steady. His breath slowed, his shoulders squared. The yard fell silent. Then a voice she dreaded. Too smooth, too sure. Jack Boone! Caleb Price shouted from outside. I'm done playing games. Bring her out, and maybe you don't die tonight. Emily covered her mouth, shaking. Jack stepped forward, voice cold and unshaken. You won't touch her. Caleb laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. You think you can keep her? She's not yours. Jack's voice came out low, dangerous. She's not yours either. You're gonna die for her? Caleb shouted. No, Jack answered. I'm gonna live with myself. Emily felt tears rise, hot and overwhelming. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't scream. He just spoke with a quiet certainty that struck deeper than any threat. Caleb snarled. Last chance, Boone. Jack tilted his head slightly. You should have stayed home. A long silence followed, thick, suffocating. Then Caleb gave the order. Get him. Emily's stomach dropped. She pressed both hands over her mouth to hold back a sob. Jack stepped further into the doorway, rifle ready, shoulders steady. For her, for the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand between her and danger. Not because they owned her, not because they wanted something, but simply because she mattered, and she realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She didn't want Jack Boone to die for her. She wanted him to live for her. The night exploded into noise. Caleb's men charged forward, boots thundering across the dirt. Emily dropped lower behind the dresser, hands shaking so violently she couldn't hold still. Her breath came short and sharp, but she forced herself silent, listening, fearing every sound, every gun click, every angry shout. Jack stepped outside before anyone could reach the door, rifle held firm. Moonlight cut across his face, showing the calm of a man who'd already decided what he would and wouldn't allow. One of Caleb's men lifted his gun. Jack fired first, warning shot into the ground. Dirt burst upward, kicking dust into the air. I don't want to kill you, Jack said, voice steady. But I will if you cross this fence. The men hesitated. A moment of truth hung in the air. Then Caleb pushed his horse forward, angry, breathing hard. You think you're some hero, Boone? Caleb spat. You think saving her makes you something? Jack didn't blink. It makes me human. Caleb scoffed. She's mine. Her father promised her. Jack cut him off, stepping closer. A father doesn't own his daughter. A man doesn't own a woman. And you sure as hell don't own her. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She pressed a hand over her mouth, heart pounding. Caleb snarled, gripping the reins so hard his knuckles whitened. Move aside, Boone. Jack met his eyes without fear. No, you'll die for her. Caleb barked. Jack shook his head slowly. No, I'll live with my choice. That's the difference between you and me. Caleb's breath shook with frustration, fury boiling under his skin. He drew his pistol. Emily gasped audibly. Caleb heard it. He whipped his head toward the house. Emily. Jack stepped directly into the line of fire. Look at me, Price. Caleb's hand trembled. You fire that gun, Jack said quietly, and you become the man everyone already whispers you are. A coward hurting someone weaker because it's the only power you have left. The words hit Caleb like a punch. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. Jack's voice dropped lower. You want to walk away tonight with pride? Then walk away. Because if you cross that gate, you won't walk at all. Silence. Even a wind paused. Emily felt her heart stop. Finally, Caleb's hand lowered. The pistol dropped back into its holster. Not because he grew kinder, not because he understood, but because he feared the one thing he had never faced before. A man he couldn't bully. A man who didn't want anything from him. A man who didn't break. Caleb pulled the reins hard and spat into the dirt. This ain't over. Jack didn't move. It is tonight. Caleb turned his horse sharply and rode into the darkness, his men scrambling after him, eager to leave the ranch behind. The night fell still again. Jack stood in the yard, chest rising and falling, rifle hanging at his side. The danger was over, but the weight of what almost happened pressed down on him. Emily pushed herself up, limping toward the doorway. Jack! He turned, and for the first time she saw him look unsteady. Not physically, but emotionally, like the thing he feared most wasn't bullets, but the thought of losing someone again. You okay? He asked, voice softer now. Emily walked closer until she stood inches from him. You could have died. Jack swallowed. So could you. She shook her head. You didn't do this because you're strong. You did it because you're good. He looked away, voice low. I don't know if I'm good. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing his rough hand. Then let me tell you something you can believe. He met her eyes. You're the first person in my life who stood between me and danger, she whispered, and not because they wanted something. Not because they had something to gain. You stood there because it was right. Jack's breath caught. Emily squeezed his hand gently. That makes you good, even if you don't see it yet. Jack looked down, emotion pulling at every line of his face. Then he spoke softly, honestly. I'm glad you ended up at my gate. Emily smiled. A real one, small but full of warmth she thought she'd lost forever. Me too. He led her back inside, closing the door behind them. The lamp flickered once before settling into a warm glow that filled the room. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, and Jack placed the rifle aside, finally letting himself breathe. Rest, he said. You're safe now. For how long? She whispered. As long as you want to be. Emily blinked through rising tears. She had never heard anyone say something like that to her. Not with sincerity, not with kindness, not with choice. And in that quiet room, she understood the moral of everything that happened. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who fight the hardest battles, but the ones who choose to do what's right, even when no one is watching. Jack chose to be better than his past. Emily chose to believe she deserved more than fear. And for the first time in both their lives, they weren't standing alone.